All right, so we're diving deep today into this Joe Rogan Experience episode with Chris Williamson. It's got it all, man. Antarctica, pyramids, the media, personal growth, you name it, it's probably in there.
Yeah.
And we're going to try and unpack the best parts for you. So are you ready to get weird?
Yeah, definitely. It's a wild ride, and there's a lot to cover.
Okay, so they start out like super casual.
Right.
It's just shooting the breeze. You know how these podcast things go. But then, boom, out of nowhere, they're talking about Antarctica.
Oh, yeah, the lighter story.
Yeah, a friend of theirs brings a comedy mothership lighter. That's Joe Rogan's comedy club, by the way, all the way to Antarctica, supposedly to, enjoy the scenery. But then he loses it on, like, ancient permafrost or something. It's just bizarre, right?
Definitely a head scratcher.
But here's the thing. This random story actually leads into a much bigger conversation about, like, how we believe things and process information.
It's a good example of how even the smallest detail can spark a much larger discussion. In this case, it leads into a discussion about testing those beliefs, because from this lost lighter in the ice, they jump right into this whole experiment with flat earthers and, well, globies, as they call them.
Yeah, globies. I love that. So get this. 4 flat earthers and 4 globies who believe the Earth is a sphere all go down to Antarctica.
And this wasn't just some casual trip, right? Someone actually funded this whole expedition. I think they said it cost something like $35,000 per person.
Yeah, Will Duffy, I think his name was.
Yeah.
Anyway, their mission, so to speak, was to watch the sun for 24 hours straight during the Antarctic summer. The idea being that if the Earth is flat, the sun wouldn't behave the way it does on a globe.
It's kind of an extreme way to test a theory, but it really highlights the dedication some people have to their beliefs. And more importantly, the power of firsthand experience. Because, as they talk about on the show, 3 out of the 4 flat earthers ended up changing their minds after seeing the continuous daylight.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You travel to the bottom of the world with this, like, core belief, and then, boom, what you see completely changes your entire perspective.
It's a great example of how powerful direct observation can be in challenging our assumptions. So, it kind of makes you think, when was the last time you encountered something that really made you question what you thought you knew?
Seriously. It's easy to get stuck in our ways.
Yeah.
Okay, so from Antarctica, and we're moving fast here, folks, they shift to talking about these crazy claims about the Great Pyramid of Giza.
The one in Egypt.
That's the one. Apparently, there are these new findings based on some fancy tech called synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography. It's basically a way of using radar to see what's underground.
Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Totally. And get this, they're saying there are these massive structures hidden deep beneath the pyramid, going down over 600 meters and connecting to even deeper features, like 2 kilometers down.
Wow, that's deep. So like a whole underground city or something.
Who knows, right? But that's the kind of thing people are speculating about. It's wild. They even talk about how the announcement of these findings was accompanied by, like, dramatic music, which just adds to the whole mystique.
Makes it sound like the trailer for a documentary or something.
Exactly. And they reference a guy named Jay Anderson, who apparently broke it all down. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Zahi Hawass, the famous Egyptologist, he basically dismissed these findings as total nonsense. But then you got Graham Hancock, who's known for his, shall we say, unconventional theories about ancient civilizations, and he's super into it.
So you've got the traditional expert saying it's bogus and the alternative history guy saying it's amazing.
Yep, that's about the size of it. It really shows you how much debate there is around these ancient structures. And then they go on to mention Christopher Dunn, who has this theory that the Great Pyramid was actually some kind of giant power plant.
A power plant? Really?
That's what he says. So yeah, the pyramid stuff is a whole rabbit hole in itself.
And speaking of rabbit holes, how about the whole conversation about extremism and social media?
Oh yeah, that was interesting. They played this clip of John Cleese, the British comedian, from like 30 years ago. And he explains why extremism can be so appealing because it gives you enemies.
That's pretty insightful, especially considering it was way before social media became what it is today.
I know, right? It's like he predicted the whole thing. He talks about how whether you're on the left or the right, having those enemies, those groups or ideologies you define yourself against, it makes you feel good, morally superior.
It's like a built-in sense of righteousness. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Makes everything nice and simple, right?
Right. But of course, it's not that simple at all. And the hosts make a good point about how social media has just blown this whole dynamic wide open.
Oh yeah, social media is like the perfect breeding ground for this kind of thinking. You get these echo chambers where people just reinforce each other's extreme views without ever really being challenged.
It's like everyone's trying to one-up each other on how outraged they are.
Yeah.
And it becomes this weird kind of virtue signaling, like, look how much I care about this issue by tearing down the other side.
It's definitely a distraction from actually trying to understand and address complex issues. It's much easier to point fingers and feel righteous than it is to engage in thoughtful dialogue.
So yeah, the social media discussion was a bit heavy, but super relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of ties into this idea they bring up about performative empathy versus actually doing good.
Oh, I like that. Performative empathy. It's like caring more about appearing to care than actually doing anything meaningful.
Exactly. And they mentioned Elon Musk saying he's all about actually doing good, not just looking like he is. They talk about how some people online just love to attack others as a way to, deflect attention from their own flaws.
It's easier to tear someone else down than to build yourself up, right?
Totally. And that ties into this other concept they discussed, criticism capture. It's basically the idea that when people are constantly bombarded with criticism, it can really mess with them.
Like, you mean it can make them afraid to speak their minds or share their work?
Yeah, exactly. It can make them super defensive and aggressive, or it can make them totally shut down and self-censor.
So basically, too much criticism can stifle creativity and authenticity.
That's the idea. It's like walking on eggshells all the time, afraid to say the wrong thing. Okay, so from the online world, we go to, believe it or not, attacks on Tesla cars.
Tesla cars, what's going on there?
Apparently, there's been a lot of vandalism, even swastikas being painted on them, which is a pretty big shift from how Tesla was viewed before.
Right, Tesla used to be seen as like the eco-friendly, progressive car.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now it's become this symbol of something else entirely for some people. And they link this to Elon Musk's views on things like U.S. aid and NGO funding. They even bring up Mike Benz as an expert on this stuff.
What does Mike Benz say about it?
Well, he basically talks about how some NGOs that get government funding are involved in organizing protests and stuff, even potentially paying people to protest.
Interesting. So it's not just grassroots activism, but potentially orchestrated movements with specific agendas.
That's what they're suggesting. And they point out the irony of people who consider themselves left-leaning now engaging in actions like vandalism, which is often associated with the far right, all in response to Musk and his ideas.
So it's a really complex situation with a lot of different perspectives and motivations at play.
Yeah, it's not as simple as good guys versus bad guys, like in that John Cleese clip. And speaking of complexity, all this talk about politics and social issues seems to have really gotten to them because they start talking about how tired they are of it all.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's a lot to process constantly.
I know, right? They even bring up this silly story about a capitalization error in Newsweek as an example of how desperate the media is for clicks.
Like a slow news day kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads into a bigger discussion about how traditional media is struggling to keep up with independent media.
It's a tough time to be in the legacy media business.
For sure. They're basically saying that the mainstream media is now looking to independent creators for ideas and trying to figure out how to capture some of that audience.
Makes sense. Independent media is where a lot of the innovation and interesting conversations are happening.
Right. They also talk about this trend of anything considered traditionally masculine, like being into cars or fitness, now being labeled as right-wing.
It's like we can't have hobbies anymore without it being political.
It's kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
They even mention a Media Matters study that miscategorized a bunch of media personalities as right-wing when they weren't.
So even the people trying to track these things are getting it wrong.
Yeah, it's a mess. And then they go into this whole discussion about why the left might be having a harder time in the independent media space. One of the hosts even talks about how, while he might agree with Trump on some things, he still holds many left-leaning views.
Right. It's a reminder that people's political beliefs are often way more nuanced than simple labels.
Totally. Okay, ready for another topic shift?
Hit me.
Healthcare.
Oh boy, that's a big one.
Huge. They talk about the U.S. healthcare system, comparing it to the U.K.'s National Health Service. And one of the hosts actually shares some pretty personal stories about medical debt leading to bankruptcy. It's really eye-opening.
It's a stark reminder of how broken the system is for many people.
Yeah. And they talk about how the death of the United Health CEO actually triggered a lot of negative reactions from people who are frustrated with the healthcare system. There were even reports of an increase in denied claims recently, so people are definitely feeling the pressure.
Makes sense. When people are struggling to afford healthcare, the last thing they want to hear about is a CEO making millions.
Exactly. They call it a quiet epidemic of people suffering because of healthcare costs. And they also bring up the revolving door between the FDA and pharmaceutical companies. how people move back and forth between those two worlds. It raises some questions about conflicts of interest.
That's a whole other can of worms, right? The relationship between government agencies, big pharma, and the public.
Totally. And then they go on to talk about the FDA's ban on compounded Ozempic and similar drugs, which they say could be limiting competition and access for patients.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides.
Now, from healthcare, they jump to get ready for the body positivity movement and how Ozempic, the weight loss drug, is kind of shaking things up.
That's an interesting connection I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, me neither. But they basically suggest that the fact that people can now lose weight so easily with these drugs might expose some of the, well, maybe superficiality of the body positivity movement.
So, like, if anyone can achieve a certain body type with a pill, does that change the meaning of body acceptance?
That's what they're getting at. And they talk about how, like in Hollywood, any noticeable weight loss now leads to speculation about drug use, which might actually discourage people from losing weight naturally.
It creates this weird pressure where people might be judged either way.
Exactly. And they point out that Ozempic itself has potential downsides, like muscle and bone loss and other side effects.
It's a reminder that there's no magic bullet, and even seemingly quick fixes can come with risks.
Right. And they have this theory that thin people might be more critical of Ozempic users because it's like it undermines the whole idea of working hard to be thin.
So it challenges the idea that thinness equals discipline and willpower.
Yeah, something like that. It's a really interesting psychological angle.
It is. And speaking of interesting angles, how about the part where they bring up Alex Jones and conspiracy theories?
Oh, yeah, that was a wild turn.
Yeah.
They mention how much Alex Jones has changed physically and even joke about him being on Ozempic. But then they go into this deeper discussion about conspiracy theories in general.
Well, like what drives people to believe them?
Exactly. And then they really go down the rabbit hole, talking about all kinds of crazy scientific theories, like the idea that our universe might exist inside a black hole.
Inside a black hole, that's mind-blowing.
I know, right? And they talk about the Boltzmann brain theory, which is this idea that a conscious brain could just randomly pop into existence out of the chaos of the universe.
So we're just like a cosmic accident.
Maybe. It's kind of a terrifying thought, but also kind of cool. And then they talk about the possibility of infinite parallel universes.
So there could be countless versions of ourselves out there living completely different lives.
That's the theory. And they even touch on the Big Bang Theory, calling it a kind of miracle.
So even the most well-established scientific theories have elements of mystery and wonder.
For sure. And they mention the existence of supervoids in the universe, which are these vast empty spaces that are like mind-bogglingly huge.
Makes our everyday problems seem pretty insignificant, right?
Totally. Okay, so after that cosmic detour, they bring it back down to Earth, talking about relationships. One of the hosts says that taking a long trip with your partner early on can be a great way to test your compatibility.
Makes sense. Travel can be stressful, and it forces you to work together and navigate new situations.
Yeah. And then they get into some, surprisingly personal health topics. They talk about varicocele, which can affect male fertility, the ethical considerations of surrogacy, and the potential impact of environmental factors on fertility and child development.
Heavy stuff, but important to talk about.
Definitely. And they highlight the alarming rise in obesity rates globally, saying that the average American pig now has a lower body fat percentage than the average American.
Wow, it's a powerful image. It really drives home the point.
Yeah. Then they move on to the issue of declining male college enrollment and success, discussing potential factors like different learning styles, societal expectations, and a perceived lack of positive male role models on the left.
It's a complex issue with a lot of different contributing factors.
For sure. And they talk about the idea of a purity spiral on the left, which can make it hard for people to change their views or affiliations without facing backlash.
So like a fear of being labeled a traitor or something if you don't toe the party line.
Right. And they also suggest that traditional corporate environments might not be a good fit for a lot of men. They talk about the importance of finding fulfillment in things other than just money.
It's about finding purpose and meaning in life, not just chasing material success.
Exactly. And they explore the differences between type A and type B personalities, the challenges of being a high achiever, and the existential angst that a lot of young men feel.
So it's not just about external success, but also about internal well-being.
Right. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. They start talking about this tendency we all have to ignore advice and learn things the hard way. You know, those obvious life lessons that only really sink in when you experience them firsthand.
I think everyone has been there. It's like we need to make our own mistakes to truly learn.
Exactly. And they talk about the backlash that rich and famous people get when they express unhappiness, like people think they have no right to complain. They also quote Naval Ravikant, who said something about how it's harder to give up material desires than it is to acquire them in the first place.
That's a deep one. It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of more, but true happiness often lies in letting go.
Right. Then they talk about how our social circles shape our values.
Yeah.
And they share this funny anecdote about their producer falling asleep during the recording.
Sounds like a long episode.
It was. And that somehow leads to a tangent about bulldog breeding and their snoring habits. I told you it was a wild conversation.
They really went all over the place.
Okay, but before we wrap up, they share this crazy story about a Finnish soldier who survived taking a massive dose of methamphetamine, like a seriously unbelievable amount.
That's insane. The human body can be surprisingly resilient.
Right. And they end by talking about the concept of self-authoring, which is basically taking control of your own life and making your own choices. They even ask this thought-provoking question. Who would you call if you were stuck in a third world prison?
That's a tough one.
No, right? They jokingly say Tim Kennedy, the special forces guy.
Makes sense. You'd want someone resourceful and capable in that situation.
Yeah. They also talk about the difficult job that law enforcement has, especially these days, and how the defund the police movement might have had some unintended negative consequences. They also point out how viral videos can create a skewed perception of the police.
It's important to remember that there are good and bad people in every profession, and judging an entire group based on a few isolated incidents is never fair.
Exactly. Then they touch on the current political landscape, the New York Times admitting they were wrong about the lab leak theory, and how information on the internet never really goes away.
It's like a permanent record of everything we say and do online.
For real. And they circle back to the Tesla protests and vandalism, connecting it to Elon Musk's efforts to expose government funding inefficiencies. They talk about how risky it can be to be a whistleblower or investigative journalist.
Going against the grain can definitely have consequences.
Yep. And finally, they wonder what current issues that are being ignored by the media will be studied by historians in the future. They think the impact of smartphones and social media will be a big one.
It's hard to predict, but I think they're probably right. We're all so plugged in these days, it's bound to have some long-term effects we can't even see yet.
So there you have it. A whirlwind tour of this epic Joe Rogan Williamson conversation. We covered everything from Antarctica to pyramids to social media to healthcare to the body positivity movement to conspiracy theories to, well, you get the idea. It was a lot.
It was, and it really highlights how interconnected everything is, how seemingly unrelated topics can weave together in unexpected ways.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Remember those basic bitch insights they were talking about? Those obvious life lessons that we all know, but often don't really learn until we experience them firsthand? Well, which one of those really resonates with you right now? And what's one small thing you can do today to actually start living that lesson instead of just knowing it?
Yeah, that's a good question to ponder. We can all benefit from taking a step back and examining how those basic truths show up in our own lives.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.